Jerusalem. It was 4 a.m. on May 14th, 1948. The first hints of light were just beginning to appear in the eastern sky. Aryeh Shur got the phone call he was waiting for. A Jewish observer notified him that the first British soldiers were preparing to move out of the General Post Office in Jerusalem. Ah, yes, our information was correct, thought the Haganah commander, who was assigned the task of taking the governmental buildings for the Jews. The British were beginning the evacuation of Jerusalem a full 20 hours before their mandate in Palestine expired. Why were they leaving early? Because the Arab armies had vowed war against Israel once the British mandate expired on midnight of May 15th. So the British were going to exit Jerusalem early on the 14th of May, not the 15th. Aryeh Shur had built a precise plan around this. Jewish observers would be posted at every British governmental building, every hospital, every barracks, and the Haganah, that clandestine fighting force of the Jews, which would not officially become an army for another 20 hours, the Haganah had stationed soldiers near each building, ready to move in at the exact moment the British left. The Arabs had planned to begin most of their efforts to oppose the partition plan on May 15th when the mandate expired, but the Jews had planned their efforts to begin on May 14th as the British left their posts. This is the first of the lesser-known facts in the 24-hour period of 4 a.m., May 14th, to 4 a.m., May 15th. The subject of our story, then, is to tell some of the lesser-known facts and stories of that pivotal 24-hour period. The time is now just after 4 a.m. on May 14th. The first Jews get ready to take their first piece of key ground in Jerusalem that wasn't already theirs. This key area of Jerusalem, the object of their focus, was called Bevengrad. It was like a pie-shaped piece of land whose tip touched the northwestern corner of the old city. All the governmental buildings of Palestine were there. In one of them, this very morning, Sir Alan Cunningham, the British commanding officer, was delivering his farewell address early that morning. That building was the Palestine Broadcasting Station. It is now 8 a.m. Aryeh Shur has 400 Haganah men and another 600 Jewish volunteers ready to take Bevengrad, building by building, as soon as the British leave each building. What was the most important piece of equipment carried by those 1,000 Jews? Rifles? Hardly. A lesser-known fact was that their most needed equipment was wire cutters. You see, the British kept their buildings open towards the Arab side, but put barbed wire fences between their buildings and the Jews. The race for the Jews, the race against time, would be about whether they could get through the fences with wire cutters before the Arabs on the other side would simply walk in the front door and take the buildings for themselves. Meanwhile, back at the Palestine Broadcasting Station, Arab Raji Sehun took the microphone that Sir Alan Cunningham used and proclaimed over the airwaves, "A new era for Palestine begins today. Long live a free and independent Palestine." Then he left the broadcasting station to relocate to the new Arab radio headquarters in Ramallah to the north. Being driven on his way there, he glanced back for one last look at the Jerusalem skyline behind him. But something caught his eye. On the top of the building in which he had just declared, "A new era begins today," was a blue and white Zionist banner now waving in the wind. The biggest problem of the Haganah was arms. It was illegal for Jews to have arms during the period of the British Mandate. The Jews had smuggled in small arms, but they couldn't get most of what they wanted into the country. Ships full of armaments lay offshore, beyond the international boundary line. David Ben-Gurion hoped that the British ships, like the Jerusalem soldiers, would depart their posts early. Would they? The SS Borea, the ship they needed most, was told to leave international waters and make a break for Jaffa. If they could get this ship into the Jaffa port at Tel Aviv, things would be different. It contained large amounts of ammunition, rifles, and machine guns, but it also had something the Jews needed more than anything else, something they had none of: heavy artillery. But as soon as the SS Borea broke for the port, it was intercepted by British destroyers and forcibly escorted up to Haifa. Once docked, British troops marched up and formed an arc around the ship. No one was going to be allowed on or off. It is now 4 p.m. on May 14th. At exactly 4 p.m. on May 14th, David Ben-Gurion stood up and rapped a walnut gavel on the table in front of him. In the land of Israel, the Jewish people came into being, he began. He was declaring the state of Israel. But why so early? He was a full 8 hours ahead of midnight. Why? It is another lesser-known fact that Israel had a choice to make. You see, today, the 14th, was Friday. The mandate was set to expire on Friday night at midnight, on Shabbat. Rather than wait till after Shabbat, or to declare the state during Shabbat when the Orthodox would not be present, the government of Israel decided to declare the state before sundown on Friday. So at precisely 4 p.m., David Ben-Gurion began his famous speech with, "In the land of Israel, the Jewish people came into being." After speaking of the dream that was never lost, of returning to their homeland, it was, he continued, the self-evident right of the Jewish people to be a nation, as all other nations in their own sovereign state. Accordingly, he said, by virtue of the natural and historic right of the Jewish people and the resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations, we hereby proclaim the establishment of the Jewish state in Palestine to be called Israel. Then he set out the principles of liberty, justice, and peace as conceived by the prophets of Israel, and the safeguarding of the holy places. He called on Jewish people all over the world to stand by us in the great struggle for the fulfillment of the dream of generations, the redemption of Israel. With trust in the Almighty, he concluded, "We have set our hand to this declaration at this session of the Provisional Council of State in the city of Tel Aviv on the 5th day of IR 5708, the 14th day of May, 1948. It was now 4:37 p.m. When we return, we will tell you what happens at midnight. More lesser-known facts and stories await. Until then, this is Bob Odell from Root Source saying, Shalom.